So welcome again, everybody. What we do on Thursday evenings here is it's almost always me talking, and so what I will do is we've got a number of different texts or topics I cycle through, and I'll talk for about 20 minutes, and then we discuss it together. So tonight I'm going to be reading from the Dhammapada, which, if you're familiar with it, if you're familiar with it, we don't need me to tell you. If you're not, it is one of the earliest teachings from the Buddhist canon, and it's actually very straightforward. It's a series of verses. There are something like, I don't know, 20 or 30 different poems in here, which are 2 or 3 pages. And it's really a set of, this is the right path to be following, this will bring you happiness, this will make your life more pleasant, and it will lead, in Buddhist terms, to release or nirvana. And this is the unhealthy path. I'll read this poem, and then I'll read it a second time, inserting my commentary, my editorial comments, explaining what it's talking about and how this is applicable to our lives. And then we will talk about this together. So the poem is called The Mind. The Mind. Quivering, wavering, hard to guard, to hold in check, the mind. The sage makes it straight like a fletcher, the shaft of an arrow. Like a fish pulled from its home in the water and thrown on the land, this mind flips and flaps about to escape Mara's sway. Mara is kind of the devil. Hard to hold down, nimble, alighting wherever it likes, the mind. Its taming is good. The mind, well tamed, brings ease. So hard to see, so very, very subtle, alighting wherever it likes, the mind. The wise should guard it. The mind, protected, brings ease. Wandering far, going alone, bodiless, lying in a cave, the mind. Those who restrain it from Mara's bonds, they'll be freed. For a person of unsteady mind, not knowing true Dhamma, serenity, set adrift, discernment does not grow full. For a person of unsodden mind, unassaulted awareness, abandoned merit and evil, wakeful, there is no danger, no fear. Knowing this body is like a clay jar, securing this mind like a fort, attack Mara with the spear of discernment, then guard what's won without settling there, without laying claim. All too soon, this body will lie on the ground, cast off, bereft of consciousness, like a useless scrap of wood. Whatever an enemy might do to an enemy, or a foe to a foe, the ill-directed mind can do to you even worse. Whatever a mother, father, or other kinsman might do for you, the well-directed mind can do for you even better. So, I'll read it through and with comments and thoughts. Just a couple of overall observations. Mind here is a word, generally, and I think it's going to be the word that's used here, I don't have the Pali in front of me, but generally the word that's used for mind is chitta, and it can be translated either as heart or as mind. So when you hear mind, think, is it talking about intellect, or is it talking about emotion, compassion, kindness? We have this mind, heart-mind is not separable. And we have this thing in the West where we've separated heart and mind, but this is common in other languages. There's chitta, in Chinese it's xing, which means the same thing. It's heart-mind. I don't know the word in Vietnamese, but there's a similar word in Vietnamese, a lot of other languages. And the general idea here is that we tend to identify ourselves with this. We tend to think, this is me, this body, this mind is me. But that's an illusion. It's a delusion. And if we look really, really, really closely, what we'll see is there's actually nothing here that is permanent. There's nothing here that's lasting. Everything is impermanent. The body is constantly arising, abiding, and fading away. We eat food, and that food becomes the body. We read, we hear stories. Those stories become our mind. Our mind is constantly changing. Our body is constantly changing. There is nothing here that is steady. There is nothing here that is reliable. And by allowing ourselves to just be hauled along by this, which is what we do, we just let it lead, allowing ourselves to be hauled along by this, we're allowing ourselves to be dragged from delusion to delusion, dragged from just event to event, from idea to idea. And this being dragged along causes us suffering. Dukkha is the word, discomfort, stress. And it causes us, because we're not reflective, causes us to just react to what's going on in ways that are unskillful. When they're unskillful, in that they perpetuate this cycle of dukkha, this cycle of suffering, this cycle of stress. So pausing, reflecting, and training ourselves is a way to bring this cycle to an end, is a way to bring a reduction in the discomfort and stress in this life and in the lives around me, as a way to bring this release, this peace. So that's what this is about. Quivering, wavering, hard to guard, to hold in check the mind. So that's just a description of the mind and the heart mind. That's what I've just said. It's hard to guard, it's hard to hold in check. We don't train ourselves to do it. It's just constantly volatile. It reacts to what goes on around it. The sage, the wise person, the spiritual practitioner, makes it, the heart mind, straight. As a fletcher, the person who used to make arrows of old, makes the shaft of an arrow straight. We make it true. We make our mind, our heart true. So it points where we want it to point. When we want to focus on something, it focuses on it and it's not distracted. It goes straight where we want it. And this is something we can train ourselves to do. And within reason, we do. We train ourselves to focus on tasks. But it's something we use in a limited way, and we don't use it in much of our life. Like a fish pulled from its home in the water and thrown on land, the mind flips and flaps around to escape Mara's sway. Our minds, we normally, in most of our lives, our minds are kind of in this environment that we just let them land in, and they're constantly struggling, that we're aware that we're suffering, we're aware that we're not happy, we're aware that this is causing us discomfort and that's causing us discomfort. We go for the bowl of ice cream because we think it will make us happy, but it won't, because we're not disciplined to have the bowl of ice cream and say, thank you, that was nice, and move on. We want another bowl. We want the next thing and the next thing. So it's taken out of its natural environment, which is this environment of peace. It flaps around, just constantly struggling to find peace. But it's like the Chinese finger, whatever you call it, where you pull your fingers and you can't get out. That's not the way to get out. Fighting makes it worse. You've got to relax to get back to that place of peace. Hard to hold down, nimble, alighting wherever it likes. The mind, more of the same. I was just describing what it's done. Its taming is good, and that's what we just did. We sat for 40 minutes and we resisted the temptation to go do something. All of us had thoughts show up. Oh my goodness, did I remember too? I really should. But we stayed here. We didn't get up and go wandering off. We're taming the mind in this practice. And this practice of taming the mind brings us calm. In the long run, it brings us calm. In the short term, it brings us calm. In the long run, it's training us to bring us calm. The mind, well tamed, brings ease. If we just train ourselves to not react, it brings peace. And we get used to not reacting. We get used to staying in this peace of non-reactivity. And we can see this in people who've trained their minds. We can see they're peaceful. We can see they're not disturbed by everyday trials and tribulations. They're not disturbed by the political, cultural, and social trauma that's going on around us. They're steady. It's not that they're not compassionate, they're profoundly compassionate, but they're steady. They just don't get rocked by it. We can do that if we train our minds. So hard to see, so very, very subtle, and the mind is very, very subtle. We don't see it because we're caught up in the gross stories, the very heavy, clumsy stories. We get caught in the emotions and we let the emotions take over. But if we slow down, the emotions can slide off, and we start to see the more subtle mind that's underneath it. And then we start to see that that too is a lot more noisy than we realise. And we start to see the subtlety underneath that and underneath that. It's very, very, very subtle. And it's constantly just shifting and sliding and landing. And we can start to see how it's happening at a very, very subtle level. The wise should guard it. And the wise do guard it. They train themselves to see these very, very subtle motions, and to, even with those subtle motions, not get taken off. There's a word that's used in our meditation which is concentration. And I have come to think of that concentration not as the ability to concentrate on something. That's where we start. We concentrate on our breath to start, whether on a line from a scripture, whatever scripture we choose. Right? Can be a picture, can be an idea. But as we practice, that concentration shifts to become more and more, not concentration on something, but not letting ourselves get distracted. Holding the mind steady. It's not about holding on to something, it's about not being taken away by things. So it's concentrating, stay in a place of peace and stability, and these ideas, these distractions, the garage door that we didn't close, the oven that we may not have turned off, they come in and they just bounce off. They don't distract us. The wise should guard it. The mind protected brings ease. Wandering far, going alone, bodiless, lying in a cave, the mind. I'm not going to comment on that. I think I can read that in a couple of ways, and so I won't get confusing. Those who restrain it from Mara's bonds, they'll be free. Those who restrain their minds, those who cultivate concentration, who don't let the mind get pulled off by the vicissitudes of life, they are freed from Mara's bonds. Mara's bonds are precisely, the bonds of the devil, the bonds of suffering. They're precisely the things that pull us off. The greed, the craving, the desire to want more, to want less, to reject, to go after things. We're free of that. For a person of unsteady mind, not knowing true Dhamma, Dhamma in this context is the teaching, is the path that leads to this peace. Not knowing true Dhamma, not knowing serenity, set adrift. Discernment does not grow form. Discernment is this ability to see clearly, to see all of these things. They're just distractions, they're stories we let ourselves get gulled by. They're not reality, they are stories. And we don't have to, completely countercultural, but we don't have to play by the story of consumerism. We don't have to get stuck in the craving for more, which drives all our ad culture, all our TV culture, all our social media culture. For a person of unsodden mind, unassaulted awareness, so that's your, the awareness is this stable place of paying attention we're talking about. Abandoning merit and evil, abandoning judgments of what's good and what's bad. What's good and what's bad are stories we make up. The Buddha said, I teach two things. I teach dukkha, which is this suffering, discomfort, dis-ease, stress, and the end of dukkha. That's all this is about. So the judgments of what's good and what's bad, as judgments, are simply a distraction. The path is, does this lead to peace, or does this lead to more suffering? And that's the only metric that matters here, the only decision parameter. For a person who's wakeful, there is no danger. There is no fear. If we're truly clear, truly clear, there is nothing to be afraid of. And we see this in cultures the world over, old cultures, in what we regard as indigenous cultures across the world. There's a totally different relationship with being, there's a different relationship with community and with the world. And in that, death, where is thy sting? It's lost it. If we are truly stable in who we are and in how we see the world around us. There is no fear. Knowing this body is like a clay jar, securing this mind like a fort, attack Mara with a spear of discernment. Then guard what's won without settling there, without laying clay. This body is like a clay jar. That's rather a complicated metaphor, but it means a couple of different things. It means clay jars are impermanent, they break. There's nothing solid, there's nothing reliable here. This body is not something that we can rely on, and in 10 years, if this body survives another 10 years, which we have no certainty it will, every atom in this body will have been changed out. Every single one. It will be a completely different body. There's nothing here to rely on. It's like a clay jar, it can break. And like a clay jar, it's a container. It's an arbitrary construction that separates a sense of me from a sense of world. And it's an arbitrary distinction, both because the world, by consuming it, I continue to renew this body. There really is no separation. And because constantly the body is shedding cells. I'm constantly breathing in and breathing out and taking oxygen and just sending out carbon dioxide. And I'm constantly through my pores and through my excretory system getting rid of stuff that's no longer useful. So the boundary is really an artificial boundary, just like a clay jar with an open top. It's an artificial construct. With this same spirit of discernment we talked about, laying guard to what's one, which is our freedom from these arbitrary ideas, from this false sense of self, from this getting caught on craving, on wanting to hold on to and wanting to reject, but without settling there, without getting stuck on anything, even on this freedom. Because if we get stuck on the freedom, we've created another trap. We've created a thing called freedom. It's another prison. So without settling there, without laying claim, it's only from this place that we are free. It's like going for a walk in the woods. If you go there and you just feel free, we lose sense of self in this environment. And we can lose that, and we lose sense of, you're in a place where our possessions don't matter anymore. They just simply don't matter. And we can have this same sense of freedom in every moment of our lives. And it's not reckless abandon to surrender and say, oh, I've given up, life is worthless. No. It's just, it's a place where we don't hold on to things. And from that place, we can relate to the world in a completely different way. We can see the suffering out there and relate to that suffering in a way that draws us into wanting to help. But it's without a sense of ego being attached to this. It's from this place of freedom. All too soon, this body will lie on the ground, cast off, bereft of consciousness, like a useless scrap of wood. And while that's obviously true from what I've said and from common sense, the important part here is that is not me. If we really get this sense of impermanence, if we really shift how we relate to the body, we recognize that there is nothing within this that I can call me. There's mystery. This experience, this life is complete mystery. And if we shift the way we recognize this as mystery, we recognize the body is wonderful, the mind is wonderful. These are incredibly powerful things to allow this experience, to allow this life. But life is to be lived, not to be held on to. And so this sack, this case, this shell, falls away like a useless piece of wood. And that's okay. It's just okay. And it's just the mystery. Whatever an enemy might do to an enemy or a foe to a foe, the ill-directed mind can do to you even worse. At a very simple level, there's a word that we don't like to use it very much these days, and it's virtue. It's how we behave in the world. Are we behaving in a way that's morally upright or not? It's the only thing I have. Is this. It's my actions. It's the footprint I leave in the world. And if I guard my mind, I am guarding how I behave in the world and how I feel about how I behave in the world. And if I do that, there is no room anywhere for any regret, for any second guessing about what I do. If I don't guard that, so I'm not guarding my mind, then my mind is going to take me down the path of greed, of cutting somebody off, of jumping in line, of shortchanging tips, of being spiteful. It's going to take me down this path which cannot make me happy. Cannot make me happy. Creates separation, creates all these resistances, doesn't create connection and love and compassion. It cannot make me happy. This is what he's talking about here. Whatever an enemy might do to an enemy, an ill-directed mind can do to this person even more so. Whatever a mother, father, or other kinsman might do for you, the well-directed mind can do for you even better. So all these people who love us, who care for us, they really look after us, they help smooth our lives, they help us find peace and find love. The most beautiful thing we can do for ourselves, and what reinforces and ultimately does that even more so, is if we really guard our mind, if we cultivate our mind, if we train ourselves to live the life that is being described here. If we literally and unthinkingly give the coat off our backs to somebody who is clearly in need. If we just naturally move into the suffering of the world and deal with it with compassion, with love, and without ego and without greed. This is everything our parents could give us and more. A place of complete peace. So this is what he's teaching me. And without